Good evening, all. Thanks, Alex, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to the webinar tonight. The aim of tonight is to give you a bit of an introduction to red cards and the discipline process, and thank you so much for the people who, as I say, who have joined. Just reading through some of the names on here. Um, just interested, how many of you got any red cards in the first couple of weeks of the season? If you've had any, just drop that into the chat, and just interested to see who's already experienced the discipline process this season. In terms of this session, if we, I don't have control, I don't think of my slides, so if, I might have to ask Becky to move through. Thank you, Becky. What we're looking to cover today, so we will talk briefly about why we've got a discipline process. Oh, okay. Andrew's had a red card on Saturday. Roy's had one. So there's a few of you who had them already. Sorry, why do we have a discipline process in rugby? Who runs the discipline process? What is the process? How do we manage it? And then obviously the role of the club within that. And this is meant to be an introduction to the red cards and discipline process. But if you've got any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will either deal with them as we go along, or we will pick them up at the end. But if we get a lot of questions, like we did last week on a different subject, what we'll do is circulate an FAQ document to everyone who's on this call. So please put a few discipline officers I see now come into the chat as well, but please put any questions in the FAQs. In terms of, we tend to use abbreviations, so apologies if we do that. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, if any of us say Reg 19, Reg 19 is the RFU discipline regulations. That's Regulation 19. CB is a constituent body, so your local county or area, so Oxfordshire, Dorset and Wilts. MO, match official. MOA is match official abuse. I don't think we're going to talk too much about match official abuse tonight. If you hear the abbreviation 512, that's shorthand for misconduct charges or charges contrary to the interests of the game. CB, discipline sec, is your local discipline representative. And then at the bottom, we're not going to touch on age grade unless people want to touch on it. And as I say, put that in the Q&A. It'd be CBAGS is the CB, so the local area age grade discipline secretary. So we thought we'd just put those in to start with, and if we move forward. So just a quick video to start with, and there's a little poll going to come up, but just interested for thoughts on here. What is foul play? What's how you would see this? And there's no right or wrong answer at this stage. So I can't see the poll, Alex, but I presume it's oh, there you go. So you should have a poll pop up on your screen. If you just want to enter what you think that is, foul play, penalty, yellow card, red card. Alex, I'll let you come in with the answers on that. I can't see the outcome unless you.
Yeah, no worries. Final little moment to get your vote in, please. I can see the majority of you got it in now. We've got a bit of a mixed response, so I'll end that poll and I'll share the results with you, David. So the majority are going for a yellow card, but a
Yeah.
real mixture there in there, David.
Yeah, we've got the full mixture, which is always good. This one actually went before a RFU panel. This was found to be a red card. I don't know if we just want to play it, Becky. We're not going to get too much into the actual sort of mechanics of everything tonight, but the reason why it was a red card is that it was, I don't know how to play, it was deemed to be head contact with a high degree of danger. No one is saying this is intentional. And that's one of the things we'll talk about, intentional or reckless or accident. But unfortunately, head-on head contact at a high degree of danger, so it's a red card. So that was that one. If we just move on to the next one. There's a few choices here you can go with. Feel free, anyone, to put questions in the FAQ as you're waiting for these. And there you go. Got a few choices there to look at. Is it foul play, or sorry, no foul play? Is it penalty to green to blue, yellow card to green to blue, red to green to blue? Unfortunately, the blue player was injured in this incident. Whether that impacts anyone's decision.
So last little chance before I close this one. Get your vote in. What do you think it is? I can see the majority have done it. If you can't see any polls for any reason, put your answers in the chat. That's absolutely fine. But I'm going to close that now, end it, and I'll share the results with you. And David, it looks like majority have gone for no foul, play on. And that's followed by a yellow card to green.
Okay, thank you everyone for doing that. I'm just looking at the results. So again, a really mixed response there. And in this incident, the blue player unfortunately suffered an injury to their jaw, but ultimately it was deemed by a panel to be no foul play. It was deemed to be a contest for the ball, a fair contest for the ball. And then as the player came down, there was unfortunately a stray boot from green that caught blue player's face, which may have contributed to the injury. But the panel found no foul play. So just two examples of what would happen. Obviously, if you were faced with those as a club, you would be deciding whether to challenge the card or to accept the card, and that's something we'll go through tonight. Just in terms of the why do we have the discipline process? So obviously it's one of the main core values. So TREADS, teamwork, respect, enjoyment, discipline, and sportsmanship. Obviously we strive to ensure that the game of rugby is played in a safe way, and very much from a police or criminal process, it is that the discipline needs to be regulated on the field, and we need to control our game and the players within it. But ultimately, we're managed by World Rugby laws and regulations. So World Rugby 17 lays down the framework for that we must follow, New Zealand must follow, Wales, every nation must follow. So what we have in place is exactly the same as any other nation, and the sanctions that apply consistently across the world. In terms of the RFU team, we're a small team set up. Myself is David Barnes, so I'm head of discipline at the RFU. I have a legal officer with me in Kieran. I also have a case officer, Josh, who deals mostly with misconduct issues and discrimination cases. And we have a support in Ronan. We have an age grade discipline secretary, Ian Skillen, who looks just after the under 18s games. And there's a different process in place for age grade players with smaller sanctions and an education first approach. And then, as you'll hear from in a second, Rebecca Morgan Scott is the hearings manager who looks after all the actual hearings, all of which now are done on Zoom, or the vast majority now done on Zoom. As an RFU level, we hear very few cases in person anymore, and we look after all the RFU cases. Next one, please, Becky. I'm going to hand over to Becky now. It's going to take on a few slides. I can see a couple of things coming in the FAQ, so keep them coming in, and I'll keep answering those.
Thanks, Dave. Evening, everybody. So as Dave mentioned, my name's Becky. I'm the hearings manager for the RFU. So I look after the RFU level cases that we hear. We'll explain in a bit more detail about what cases that covers. But I think it's really important to mention that we're a really small team from an RFU perspective, but we're supported by a huge number of volunteers who manage discipline cases for the CBs. So in terms of the CBs, they obviously deal with the cases level 5 and below in the community game. So if you just want to have a guess in the chat, how many cases you think on average each year all of the CBs deal with. So there's a couple of options there: 600, 2,500, 1,500, or 1,800 on average. So if you want to put some guesses in the chat box, I know there's a few discipline secretaries in the webinar this evening, so you probably have seen these stats already. 10,000 as a good guess. 2.5, 1,800, 2.5. Yeah. So the right answer, if I can get the slides to jump on, is 1,800 now. So we hovered around the 1,600 mark for a number of years. We've obviously got a slight dip in the middle here through the COVID years that they've obviously impacted. But on average, most years, the CBs were dealing with around 1,600 cases. Over the last 2 full seasons, we've seen that go up to 1,800. So on average now we're seeing that number of cases being heard. It obviously varies CB by CB. There are some CBs that are significantly busier than others because of the number of clubs. But on average, the CBs are dealing with 1,800. From an RFU perspective, the columns in green there, our numbers fluctuate season on season. Last year we had 216, the year before 166, and the year before that 243. There isn't really any rhyme or reason as to why the stats are the way that they are. Unfortunately, our numbers fluctuate quite a bit, but we do have an idea that it's not really impacted by the change in the number of games that we're seeing. I think we said, Dave, it was around every 1 in every 10 games results in a red card in the community game. So that figure doesn't really change. It's been the same for a number of seasons now. So that gives you an idea of how many cases are being dealt with by the huge network of volunteers that deal with cases at CB level from a panel perspective. So as Dave mentioned, Regulation 19, that governs what we do on a day-to-day basis. So in addition to Regulation 19 itself, there's a number of appendices. The most important for people who are dealing with discipline would be Appendix 2, which is a sanctions table, and we'll go through that in a moment. Appendix 5, which includes guidance notes, and Appendix 7, which is a really useful flowchart for a hearing process. So if you've never chaired a hearing before, you could pick up Appendix 7 and it will literally take you through step by step how to run a hearing, from saying, bring people in, sit them down, do the introductions, explain who is who, what role they have, etc. So those appendices would be really important if you are dealing with a case, dealing with a red card, when you're going through as a club. Age grade rugby, age grade discipline has a slightly different regulatory process and sanction table. It follows a similar framework, but the sanction entry points are slightly different. They're obviously tailored to meet the ages of the players, and the regulatory process is also tailored slightly differently as well. Appendix 5 is the age grade discipline regulation. So if anybody here is dealing with age grade only, then that would be the appendix that you would need to look at for that. So we talk about Appendix 2, the sanction table. This is an example of an extract from a sanction table. So every single foul play law will have a corresponding entry point. So what you can see on the screen there is Law 912, and sort of some of the offences that fall within that. So biting, contact with the eyes, or punching. Thankfully, we don't see many of these too often, the biting and the contact with the eyes, but each offence will have a corresponding entry point for low end, mid-range, and then top end. The final column on the right-hand side is the maximum. That is not actually the maximum. You can go above that in certain cases. And again, we'll explain that in a bit more detail. But generally speaking, for most on-field cases, we're looking at the low end, mid-range, and top end entry points as a starting point before we then consider other factors. We'll go through that in more detail shortly. So another little quiz question. I think there might be a poll for this one. There are different sanction tables for teams playing in the Rugby World Cup as compared to teams that are playing at level 8 in England. Do you think that's true, or do you think that's false? Hopefully you picked up on the answer already. Yeah, I can see most of you have got that already.
Yeah, so I'll just close that poll now. Everyone has got it, and there's 85% say false, Becky.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. So it's the same sanction table, the same regulations that apply from top to bottom of the game. So whether you are an international player playing in the World Cup, or whether you are a player playing at level 9 at third team level, for example, the same sanction table and the same regulations will still apply to you. I know that there are often some questions about how a player might have got a different sanction to a player at a different level. And often that comes down to one of two things. It might be access to legal representation. So they might have access to a lawyer who understands the application of the regulations and the law slightly differently to perhaps somebody from a club. And it might be that the player has the ability to access something called the coaching intervention program for dangerous tackling or for that type of offence. And that might have an impact on the final sanction. So there's a couple of things that might have an impact on the final outcome, but the process that players follow will be the same regardless of what level you're playing at. So it is the same all the way through. So in terms of what the process actually is, the RFU delegates powers to the constituent bodies, of which I think there are 35. The CB has the power to deal with any case where all parties are under its jurisdiction. So if the club is under the jurisdiction of one CB and the other club is under the jurisdiction of a different CB, then it'll be dealt with by a cross-border panel. So, for example, Salisbury and Marlborough, both clubs are in Dorset and Wilts, so the Dorset and Wilts panel would deal with it. Swindon Old Boys versus Derby would be a cross-border case. So it would still be dealt with by the constituent bodies, but it would just be dealt with by a panel that's made up of people from the two different constituent bodies, the constituent body panel, sorry. And it might be that the split would be the chair from one CB and two panel members from the other, or a different sort of makeup, but it would still be dealt with at the constituent body level. No CB has the power to delegate the authority further, so they cannot direct that a club discipline their player by itself. However, we would always encourage clubs to hold their own hearings if a player is sent off. There's obviously guidance on the RFU website. There was a club guidance document. So if your player receives a red card, how that you as a club should deal with that process. You cannot deal with the player alone. It has to then go through to the CB at least, if not through to the RFU to be dealt with. But we would always encourage the club to deal with that player initially and then report it through. And we've got a slide a little later on what a club should do practically if their player does receive a red card, and give some guidance in relation to that. Having said all of that, we don't delegate power in certain cases to CBs. So there's a full list that's set out within the regulations, but sort of the headlines taken from that would be any player that's registered at or under contract with a PWR club, so Women's Premiership, Men's Premiership, Men's Championship, or National League side, so RFU levels men to 4 in the men's game. If a player is registered or a contract with any of those sides, then it would have to be dealt with by the RFU. Any anti-corruption, betting, medical or anti-doping breaches or safeguarding cases would be dealt with by the RFU. Any serious injury cases and those cases that are involving the police, again, would have to be reported to the RFU. It may be that some of those cases potentially would be sent back to the CB, but they should always be reported through to the RFU first of all. And the expectation is that we would certainly deal with it, or at the very least would case manage it to start off with. And then the final one there is any case involving discrimination based on a protected characteristic. So those cases would have to be reported through to the RFU, and then we would make a decision as to whether or not it would be the RFU that would hear it, or potentially if it would go back to the CB. But those cases are part of a list that wouldn't be managed, so wouldn't be heard by the CB straight away. So when we talk about the panel, who the panel is, the panel should be chaired by a person who's been accredited to sit in that capacity by the RFU. So from a CB perspective, that would be somebody who has been and been and done a training course that we have put on, whether that's an online course or an in-person training course. We've done a number of those over the years to ensure that the CBs have enough people that are accredited to sit on panels. And from an RFU perspective, the chair would have to be a legally qualified person. So that's a minimum of 7 years qualified as a lawyer. And then the wingers do not have to be legally qualified. What we would like to see is people who understand the game, former players, administrators, coaches, anybody really who has an involvement in rugby would be able to sit on panels, subject to obviously any conflicts in the case. The panels are a maximum of 3 people. So we've had stories from years ago now of people doing it by committee, where there'd be a sort of a round table of 10 people sitting around having a conversation about what the sanction should be. That's no longer possible. It is a maximum of 3 people. Exceptionally, it could be a panel of 2 if directed by the chair. That really came in as a result of doing hearings in person. We were sitting in Leeds and we had a phone call from somebody who was travelling across the Pennines. The weather was terrible. They weren't going to make it in time for the hearing. And rather than sending the club and all the panel members that were there back home again, we managed to sort of work our way through the regulations so that a panel of 2 could sit. And then when it came to redrafting the regulations, we changed it so that exceptionally a panel of 2 could sit if directed. That shouldn't be the norm, but it's there just in case something like that happens. And we've got guidance in the regulations for when that should be appropriately used. There should also be a discipline secretary. They are not part of the panel. They are there to assist the panel before the hearing and ensuring that everybody is there, that the hearing bundle is sent out, that the charges are brought, if necessary, to present the charges, but they are not part of the panel that makes the decision. So their role is entirely separate to the panel that are dealing with that. And then the final point is that no person with an interest in the proceedings may sit. So anybody is able to go and sit on disciplinary panels. If you're a referee, if you're a coach, if you're a player, we would absolutely welcome anybody becoming involved in being a disciplinary panel member. You are more than welcome, and we would always be grateful for volunteers. The only thing we would say is that we would have to manage any case-by-case conflicts. So obviously, if it was your club that received a red card, or if you were the referee that gave the red card, you wouldn't be able to sit. And so we would just manage it on that basis. But obviously, the more panel members and the volunteers that we have, then the easier it becomes to manage those sorts of conflicts. So another quiz question. If you're sent off during a match, you can carry on playing in other games until your case is heard. You've got a few options there. True, it's fine as long as nobody knows. False, you're provisionally suspended pending determination of the case. True, but only in friendlies. Or final one, D, I don't know.
Thanks, Becky. Just picking up just one thing. One person just said, could you explain the 7 years lay experience again, please? Just
yeah, of course. So yeah, I've just seen that in the chat there. So 7 years, 7 years lawyers experience. So for RFU panels, the chair has to be legally qualified, and it's a minimum of 7 years post-qualification experience. So we couldn't have somebody who qualified as a lawyer 2 years ago chairing panels. They have to be 7 years, and that's come from World Rugby regulations.
Thanks, Becky. And I've finished that poll off now, and 95% have said gone for false, and we've got 5% don't know.
Perfect. Yeah. So the answer is absolutely right. So you're provisionally suspended pending determination of the case. So for the 2 people who don't know, you do now have the answer. Thank you everybody for that. So if you are red carded in a game, you cannot play anywhere in the world until your case is heard. That applies top to the bottom, and that's the reason why we have such a quick turnaround of cases. It used to be that you could continue playing, but it changed. I think it was about 10 years ago now, where you now cannot play until your case has been heard. So it does result in some pretty quick turnarounds of cases from the weekend, but it does mean that players know quickly, particularly if they want to contest the charge. They know quickly where they stand with their available for selection that following weekend. So how is the process managed from red card to hearing? So as I just mentioned, it is a quick process, whether that's at RFU or at CB level. Looking at it from a CB perspective, so from a community game perspective, matches obviously held on a weekend, Saturday, Sunday. The red card report, let's say, comes from a game on a Saturday, that would be sent through to the CB discipline secretary. The hearing bundle footage will be prepared and then shared with the club, and that would probably be done on a Monday, maybe even a Sunday afternoon in some cases. On the Monday, the panel would be appointed to hear the case, and the papers would go out to the club. The club would be asked to respond, provide the information about whether or not the charge is accepted, statements, etc., etc. The hearing would take place and the decision would be made usually by most CBs on the Thursday. There's a written judgment that is then shared with the clubs. And then if an appeal hearing is needed, that would be organised by the RFU, usually in the following week. From an RFU point of view, it's almost exactly the same process, but ours is a little bit shorter. Our panel is appointed on a Monday afternoon the same way, but our hearings take place on a Tuesday evening. The judgment is shared with the clubs on the Wednesday normally, and then the appeal hearing, if we need to have one, is on a Thursday. So it's still the same process, but it's just it's within the space of a few days as opposed to going over the following week. But that's how it goes from a match on a weekend, the red card being provided, sent out to the club, hearing taking place, and then an appeal hearing being held if needed. I think this is still my side, actually. I'm going to carry on with this one, Dave, if that's okay. So in terms of the actual hearing, if a player wants to contest a red card, it's important to remember that the starting point is always that the referee is the sole judge of fact and law during a match. So when the red card is given to the panel starting point is that the referee's decision was the correct decision, unless there is one of two conditions met. So the first would be that it was mistaken identity, or the red card threshold has not been met. So the panel, if the player wants to contest it, would then have to consider all of the evidence and make its factual findings. If the panel find that the referee was wrong to award a red card, either on the basis of mistaken identity or that the red card threshold wasn't met, then the red card can be dismissed. In some cases, it could be substituted for a yellow card instead, or alternatively, the red card is just dismissed in its entirety and the player is free to play. The burden of proof to show that the match official was wrong will rest with the player. And when we use player, we sort of interchangeably in this case, we'll use club as well. So it's not simply for the player to turn up and say it's all on them to show that it's wrong. But the burden is on the player, the club, to show that the match official's decision was wrong. And to do that, they would use the video evidence, they would be able to use statements, they would call witnesses, and it would be their job to show the panel, using all of this evidence, that the match official, for whatever reason it might be, got that decision wrong, and therefore the red card should be dismissed. So that's how the panel would deal with a red card if it was the case that the player wanted to contest it. Dave, I'm going to hand back over to you for the HCP, if that's okay.
Thank you, Becky. I'm just going to touch very slightly on the HCP's head contact process. This is World Rugby's way of assessing a red card. So most instances within the game are dealt with by a judgment call. A referee will look at something and they'll decide by their looking at it, was it a red card or not? And it tends to be a subjective decision. World Rugby introduced this process for head contacts. So you've often heard people on the TV talking about it, and all the way down the levels now, there is a flow chart that people go through. I'm not going to go into huge detail, but essentially down the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see there's a number of questions. Has head contact occurred? Yes or no? Obviously, no, you don't carry on. Yes, you go forward. Has there been foul play? So this is not intentional foul play. This is the foul play. So if you remember that first clip, the player was upright, could have got lower. Therefore, they could have avoided the head contact. Therefore, it's foul play. No one says it's intentional, but that was deemed foul play, and the player's at fault because they could have got lower. And then what's the degree of danger? And you can see how we assess danger on the bit on the right. And then you can start at red card, and then you might drop down to yellow if there's a sudden and significant change in height. So that's just an example for head contact process. This applies at all levels of the game. And if you get a red card, you should be able to follow that process through and understand why the red card's given. Alternatively, you can use that process to understand if there's a challenge to a red card accepting that it's for you to show the referee was wrong as opposed for the referee to prove they're right. As a bit of a side issue, I was asked a question in the chat around number of red cards since the change in tackle height. So as you know, we lowered the tackle height in the community game, and I was doing some work on that in the last couple of weeks. And what we have seen is a significant drop in the number of red cards issued in both the community game and in the national leagues where we run the data. So in the community game, we know that the number of red cards for high tackles has dropped from 12% of all offences down to 9%. So a pretty significant drop in numbers terms. In the national leagues, what we've seen is a very significant drop from I think it's 10 cases proven 2 years ago to only four or five cases proven last year for head contact. So what we are seeing is it appears that people are getting lower in the tackle, but as a result, we're seeing more yellow cards. So number of yellow cards and 2 yellow card red cards has gone up significantly as well, which suggests that people are tackling lower, but they're not hitting people's heads with the same force and being given a red card. In terms of the next slide, I just want to touch on footage. So all footage, so any footage can be made available to the panel, be that someone's mobile phone, be that a recording on the side of the pitch, be it a VO. And it won't be accepted that sometimes people say, well, they don't have consent to share it, or the footage shouldn't have been taken anyway. If it's been taken, it can be used by a disciplinary panel. And actually, if it's not provided and the disciplinary panel know it's available, they can decide that footage may be unfavourable to the club. So always good to get that footage out to the disciplinary panel. And certainly if you're going to use it, like your VO, if you want to defend a red card or challenge a red card, that's open to you. But the burden still sits with the club or the player to show that it's not a red card. VO's great. It's not great definition though on the far side. And if the footage isn't absolutely clear, most times the panel will go with the referee who was there, usually within a couple of meters, who made a decision. So just to say that VO is available, but if you get a sort of grainy image of an incident, it's likely a panel will consider the referee's evidence is stronger than a VO. But obviously you can show that. Becky, I think I hand back to you now for the next slide. I'll start with some questions as well.
As I say, I can see there's a couple of questions in the chat, and I think there's a couple of slides that will cover some of the questions, the answers to some of the questions that have been asked. But if we don't cover it, then I'll make sure that we come back to them either before we finish or in the sender afterwards. So we'll make sure that we give everybody answers to the questions. So we've sort of covered what the process would be if a player wanted to contest a red card, how they would do that. What we wanted to talk through was what the process is where a player has either been found guilty of or pleaded guilty to. And I say I've put in here found guilty, and I should have said accepted or accepted it or been found guilty of. So the appropriate sanction that will then follow is set out, the process set out in 19.459. There are 3 stages to that. So the first part is entry point, and we mentioned that with the sanction table. So that's establishing whether it would be a low, a middle, or top. Then you would look at mitigating and aggravating features. So the first part would be entry point. And there's, for all 3 of these, there are really defined, there's a really defined list of factors that would be considered. So when looking at entry point, this is an assessment of the seriousness of the incident itself. So this is everything that happened on the pitch around the incident. So looking at the list, the first thing we have to look at, is it intentional, deliberate, or was it reckless? And really for most panels, that's one of the most important things that they'll be asked to consider. So an intentional or deliberate act is always going to be a higher entry point than something that is reckless. It's just the nature of the way that the sanction is going to work. Then we look at the gravity of the player's actions. So, what was the outcome? How serious was it? The nature of the player's actions. So did he elbow somebody? Was it a fist that was used, or was it an open-handed slap? Was there any provocation or retaliation or self-defense? Now, none of those are you can't rely on any of those as a defence, but there could be something that would be considered when looking at how serious this is. So if you have a player who is trapped at the bottom of a rock on the floor and is being punched and punched and punched by another player, and he uses his knee, for example, to get the other player off, and the referee sees all of this and gives them both a red card. When it comes to assessing all of that, the panel might look at the knee and say, well, you can't knee a player. So that's the starting point. You are guilty of an offence because you used your knee to strike another player. So that's the starting point. However, the assessment of the seriousness is it's less serious because there was provocation, potentially. There was, retaliation. I'm not sure that would be a benefit, but certainly self-defense in terms of getting that player off him when they're on the floor. So those are factors that you could look at and say, well, that might bring down the assessment of seriousness potentially. The other one that I think is a really important one that the panels will always consider is the effect on the victim. If there is no effect on the victim, then the panel will consider that more favourably, obviously, than any injury that's been caused to the player. The effect on the match, really, I think that the way panels view this is often whether or not, if there was a bit of a spat between two players, and suddenly that spilled over into the crowd, and everybody then piled in, and the match was then abandoned. The effect on the match is significant, and it was caused by this initial incident. So that might be something that the panel will take into consideration when looking at how serious the assessment. How serious this incident is at the very beginning here. The level of premeditation, was it something that they sort of ran across the pitch to get involved in, or was it an immediate spur of the moment incident? And was it completed or an attempt? There is a final catch-all of any other features, but those are the factors that they will look at, and this relates solely to what happened on the pitch. So this is nothing to do with whether or not they apologised or whether or not they turned up to the hearing. This is purely just what happened when it comes to assessing how serious the incident was on the field. So once they've considered all of those, that will lead them to an entry point. And as I say, there's certain guidance within the sanction table that will lead them to a starting point. So a strike to the head, for example, if it's head contact, means that there's a mandatory mid-range starting point. So there'll be certain things such as that will give them some guidance. Panels will have dealt with a huge number of cases, and they'll be able to sort of get a feel for where they think things lie. They'll be able to look at it and say, well, that's a mid-range case, that's a low end, that's a top end case, based on experience, based on the cases they've dealt with previously. Once they've established their entry point, that will give them a number, obviously from the corresponding sanction table. They can then look at what mitigation could be applied, and mitigation is relating to off-field cases. This relates to the player's record and character off the field. So this is where we start to talk about whether or not they accepted the charge. So did they plead guilty? Do they have a clean disciplinary record? Have they been sent off previously? Youth and inexperience is a factor. I think you could probably word that both ways to give benefit to the player or otherwise, depending on whether you want to give benefit to the player. But that's a factor to consider. Conduct at the hearing, remorse and timing of, and then any other off-field mitigating factors. So the panel will have consideration to all of those and then give a discount from the entry point of up to a maximum of 50%. That's the maximum that they will be able to give without looking at further regulations and without overcomplicating it. 50% is the maximum mitigation that can be applied from the entry point. So that then leaves you, so if we've got a starting point of say 6 weeks, that will take you down to 3 weeks if you're able to demonstrate that you can tick all of those boxes. The final piece of the puzzle then is aggravation. And there are only 3 factors the panel can consider here. It's a really short list. So the first one would be the player's status as an offender of the laws of the game. You have to have a really bad record to be able to tick this box. Even somebody like Dylan Hartley, or I'm trying to think of another player, Joe Marler, for example. Even they were sort of only starting to get a week or maybe even 2 weeks added on right at the very end of their careers. So, you have to have a pretty bad record for things to be added on for aggravation. The need for a deterrent to combat a pattern of offending. This is something that can only be applied if the RFU and or World Rugby have said that there is a memorandum in place. So currently we have one in place for match official abuse that requires a minimum period of weeks to be added on for offences. So you could add it on for that. And then any other aggravating factor that the panel considers relevant and appropriate. So you cannot add on for not pleading guilty. You can't add it on for not apologising, and you absolutely can't add it on for not wearing a shirt and tie to the hearing. We have seen that 10, 12 years ago, panels were trying to aggravate for players not wearing a tie to a hearing. Thankfully, we don't see that anymore, but it's really limited to just those three things. So it's very rare that we do see aggravation, but those are the three things that you can add it on for. So just going back to the clip we showed right at the very beginning. So if I just play it through again, just to show you. So this was the tackle on Marley Packer by Talia Brodie. So this is a red card that was accepted. The player accepted the red card was rightly given. It was a mid-range starting point. So what we've got here is an infographic that we put together. So you can see on the first column there, the entry point is mid-range, which is 6 weeks. That's the mandatory where there is head contact. And you can see that we've ticked the boxes. So it's head contact. It was reckless. It wasn't an intentional action. She got the tackle wrong. There was no injury to the player, and the player wasn't particularly vulnerable in the overall context of the game. So in terms of those factors, obviously there are more, but this is just a summary for the purpose of the infographic. So the entry point there was 6 weeks. Mitigation, the player was given 3 weeks. So accepted committing an act of foul play, had a good record, had apologised, showed remorse at the hearing, and had otherwise good conduct. So was given the full 50% mitigation. There was no aggravation applied, and then there's a list of matches there that the player was unavailable for. And when I mentioned before about players being available for coaching interventions at this level, so this is the PWR, this level players are eligible for the coaching intervention. So the player served 2-match ban, and the third match that she would have missed was replaced by successfully completing the coaching intervention programme run by World Rugby. We talk about matches and weeks. The sanction table allows that to be used interchangeably, because the sanction table applies to players as well as coaches and individuals generally. When we talk about players, matches is what we should be talking about, because that's what everybody understands players to be missing meaningful matches. So that's the easiest way, I think, for everyone to understand that if it's a 3-week ban, then they'll miss three matches. If it's a coach or if it's another individual, then could be converted to weeks, but matches and weeks can be used interchangeably. Ideally, we should be using matches for players. So having mentioned meaningful, any sanction that is imposed should be applied in a meaningful way. So to do this, the panel will request the following. So the player's upcoming schedule when they're confirmed to play, what fixtures they've played in this far during the season, and then they'll consider things like, is the player a first team player or do they move between teams? There are players who legitimately move between the first and 15. They're a fringe player. There is no issue in counting first team and second team matches. Obviously, you can't have both on the same day. But if a player was going to play for a second team game in a gap between first league weekends, that's absolutely fine if they can demonstrate that they've played for the first and second team during the season. If they play for different teams, for example, a university on a Wednesday and a club side on a weekend, potentially both of those matches could be counted during the same week. Again, as long as they can demonstrate that they were available and they would have been selected and they have played for those teams, they could both be counted. The maximum of 2 matches per week. So you could potentially serve a 3-match ban in 1.5 weeks if you were to play Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday. And then the final point is, are they available for the upcoming games? And so the question with that is, would they have played, or are they due to go on holiday? Are they injured? You know, sometimes we see players where they come to a hearing and we know that they got injured in the tackle that resulted in the red card, they're concussed, they're not available. And so the sanction would start when they're available and fit to play again. And so if they're not available for selection, then they wouldn't be able to count matches in that period. So that's really a summary of the process. So what does that mean if you or your club or a player at your club gets a red card? So the first thing to do would be to notify your CB discipline secretary. We have a list on our website that's being updated at the moment. We'll share the link to where that is. So if your player or a player in your club gets a red card, first thing to do would be to notify your CB discipline secretary, and that should be by 9 o'clock on Monday morning at the latest. Clubs would be required to report that, and then at the same time provide the player's name, the player's date of birth, RFU ID, in brackets it says if they have one, but obviously they should have one, and the name of the referee. That's just in case that the referee's report hasn't made its way through yet. The referee's report should be in by 9 o'clock on a Monday morning as well, but just in case it hasn't, that just gives the secretary time to know what's happened, and then also to start the chasing of that report as well. The CB discipline secretary will send out what's called a notice of hearing. So they will tell you when that hearing is going to take place. They will give you all of the details in that you'll need, how the hearing is going to work, who the panel will be, when it's going to take place, how it will take place, whether it's in person, whether it's on Zoom. And in return, what they would like you to do is respond to that and confirm if the charge will be accepted or denied. If it's denied, it's really helpful to know the basis on which it's denied. So rather than simply saying, we don't accept it because we don't think they made head contact, or we don't accept it because it was the wrong player, or, whatever it might be. That information is really helpful in helping the panel to start to work out what might be needed during that hearing process. The club will also be required to confirm if they need the match official to be available at the hearing. And that's a really important step, because if you don't request the match official, then the match official's report cannot be challenged. And we've already mentioned about the status that the match official's decisions are given. So if you don't request the match official to be available, or if you don't confirm that you challenge their report, then they won't be asked to attend and you can't challenge it. So it's really important that you make sure that you confirm that you need them, or you want to ask them questions when you respond to that notice. I think Dave's already mentioned about footage, but if you've got match footage, particularly if you've got any additional footage, make sure you send that through. Anything can be considered. And then if the panel finds that the match official was wrong to award the red card, once they've considered everything, then they will dismiss the red card. All of this is in a club guidance document that's on our website, and we'll make sure we send links around to that so you can have a read through that. And of course, if at any point there's any questions once you've got a red card, I'm sure all of this will go out of everyone's mind straight away. But you can always contact the discipline secretary for your CB, or contact the RFU team. We're more than happy to discuss it and just explain again what the process will be. So in summary, the process is set out step by step for all rugby panels to follow across the world. It should be a consistent process, and the consistency comes from following the regulations, not just getting the same outcome. We often see people complaining in the press following a couple of big decisions, a couple of weeks after each other, outraged that player A got 4 weeks and player B got 3 weeks, and where's the consistency? But actually, the consistency is because the regulations have been followed properly, and that's where the regulations take you, because the players have different disciplinary records, or because one player challenged it and the other one didn't. So the consistency is from the regulations being followed properly. That doesn't necessarily mean that it'll always be the same outcome. And then the final point for me is that all judgments from the RFU are available to read on the discipline section of the England Rugby website. And we also have a list of the CB MOA outcomes as well for this season. So you can go on there and have a look through and have a read of those decisions. They've got the last couple of seasons on there. So if there's any questions about any of those judgments, then just get in contact. We're more than happy to have a discussion about any of those. So I'm going to stop there. I'm sure there's probably been lots of questions that I've missed that Dave's probably been typing away in the background. But Dave, I want to hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Becky. Have a breath for a minute, and might need you to come in on some of the Q&A questions in a second. But there are a couple of things I just want to come to. So I was asked the question about the tackle intervention process, or tackle school as the papers refer to it. There's a couple of questions there about why it's not available lower down the game. Just to say that the coaching intervention process, is what it's officially called, is a World Rugby process, and they have deemed it's only available to our elite leagues. So it's only available to the Premiership, the Championship, and the women's PWR. We have asked to apply it lower down the game, but they have said that at this stage we can only apply it in the elite level. because they go through all the clips and the training, and they want to make sure it's appropriate. So that's why we can't offer it down the leagues. I think it's probably a valid argument to say that players lower down the leagues would benefit more from coaching. And it's something that we want to explore more with World Rugby and also ourselves to work out how we would run a process and how we would look to upskill people as we go forward. So that's hopefully answered that question. There's a question here I'll deal with now about if a player gets a red card and then goes on holiday. So holiday is always an interesting point. For a week or match to be meaningful, the player has to be available. So if the player arrives at a hearing and let's say it's middle of December and says that, oh, actually, I'm going skiing next week and I'm not available for selection, then that match can't count as part of the sanction, because at the time of the hearing, the player already knew he was not going to be there, or he or she knew they weren't going to be there, and therefore it can't count. However, if a ban is issued on, say, the Saturday, and the player decides that they are going to go away on holiday the next week, then that would not count against the player, because essentially that holiday, or often what we see in the professional game is someone having an operation or getting something fixed, that wouldn't count against the player because the sanction's already been set beforehand, and at the time it was set, they weren't on holiday or they weren't having an operation, so they were available for selection. So hopefully that sort of makes sense, but I'll put it into the chat as well. A question I got asked is around the use of a club hearing. So each CB is different in how they approach this. A number of CBs would like the club. So Berkshire is one that I know quite well that do this. They will ask for a club to do their own hearing, and if they think that the club have come to the right outcome, they will essentially endorse that outcome without a full hearing. That saves the club time, it saves the CB time, and everyone can move forward. And that's why it's important. If you follow the process, it should save everyone time. There are some CBs that will require people to attend, and obviously each CB has it different. But I would think in most cases, regardless of CB, if it's a serious offence, people will be asked to attend. So match official abuse would normally, regardless of what a club process was, people would be asked to attend that hearing. In many cases. I'm going to pass to Becky in relation to, there's a couple of questions in there. In terms of, I'll just do one more, in terms of vulnerability considers mitigation. Can a 17-year-old who's struggling with problems at home be considered? So that in terms of you have the ability to consider any off-field circumstances, and it would be if someone was and they would panel may ask for some evidence at different points, but if they were had a number of challenges or in their personal life, they may well consider that as part of the sanction. But they have the right to test that and to ask some questions. So I know that's happened in a few RFU cases where people have put forward things that have not gone into judgment that they wanted, that are very sensitive to them, and the panel have considered that. But it would not normally, or as far as I know, in any case, result in the sanction being quashed or no sanction being given. It's just a factor that can be considered as part of the offending. I'm going to hand to Becky to answer a couple of questions while I just look at. Oh, sorry, I'll do one more to get Becky ready. Can police court cases affect disciplinary hearings? Absolutely. If there is a police involvement, and we have one in one CB that's gone on for nearly 3 years now, and it's a red card, then that will stop the case being heard, and that player will be banned for that whole time. It's something we're trying to get a memorandum of understanding with the CPS on, but currently we're not allowed to hear cases that are under police investigation or going through the criminal court process. Thanks, Becky.
I was just about to answer that question, Dave, and then you answered. So I'm just trying to find another one. So let me just have a quick look through.
So someone asked a question about yellow cards being.
Oh yes, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did answer that. I wasn't sure whether everyone could see the answers to the questions or not. So yeah, so in terms of previous records, that would only be red cards or previous suspensions for if you've been banned for because of a citing, or if you've been banned for something like misconduct, so match official abuse off the pitch or something along those lines. So any period of suspension or a red card previously, that's what should be considered, not yellow cards. So it would just be periods of suspension previously. It's a question, is there information regarding the success of match bans you mentioned and how did the bans improve behaviour? Has there been consideration for alternatives to bans? So the answer is yes, absolutely. There has been consideration for alternatives to bans. Currently, for red cards that are given to players on field, the only option is to give a match ban. There are a couple of ways that we can give an additional sanction. So it might be that they would have to go and do, so for something like match official abuse, they would have to go and do an education course, an online education course. We have talked in the past about potentially people doing refereeing courses. In some cases, that's worked really well. In other cases, it's not appropriate for people to do that. So the answer is yes in certain cases, but at the moment we're restricted with players and red cards to the sanction table for the main part. We have spoken to World Rugby about the success we've had where we've been able to be a bit more flexible, and certainly the age grade trials where they've been able to trial education sort of sanctions instead has been really successful. So hopefully we can keep building on that. But at the moment, we're a little bit restricted because the sanction table is pretty fixed. So it's something we're going to keep under review. There's a further question as well. So is the decision of the panel sent to the club and player in writing? And is there a time frame for the letter to be sent out? So yes, there is a written judgment. There is no time frame for that to be sent out. It's a formal judgment. There's a CB version of the form, which is slightly shorter than the RFU short judgment form, which is it's actually 10 pages long, but it's a sort of a pro forma that to fill in. That is always shared with the club afterwards, and normally it's said to the club, and then the club will distribute it to the player and anyone else that needs a copy. And that will set out all of the key information, sort of a tick box, whether it was a red card, whether it was a citing, if it was accepted, challenged, and then all the information about assessment of seriousness, the mitigation, aggravation, etc., will be completed as well. So that is all shared. I think we have some guidance in the regulations for what timeframe that should be sent to the clubs. But bearing in mind, everybody, so all of the panels right the way through from community game to RFU are all volunteers. Nobody is paid for their role on panels. We've tried to give guidance, but we haven't given a definitive timeframe. Because it just doesn't always work. But that should be sent out to everybody. And just a final one on the Q&A. Yes, the player is allowed formal representation. The player can be represented by anybody they choose. It could be another player if they want to. It could be a parent, even an adult player can be represented by a parent if they choose. Or it could be a lawyer if they want to have a lawyer. The only thing that we would say is that under regulations, they cannot claim costs from the other side. So if they choose to pay for a solicitor or a barrister to represent them, and their case is not successful, they cannot, or sorry, their case is successful, they cannot claim their costs back from the other side. So every party is responsible for their own costs. So that's the only thing I would add to that. But yes, a player can be represented. There's a question in the webinar, in the chat, do all CBs fine the players for a guilty finding? It varies, so there is a cap on how much the CBs can charge. It's £125 maximum for any CB, so they cannot go above that, but within that they can charge any amount. So some CBs will charge £25, some CBs charge £100, some charge the full £125. We just make sure that it is that everybody knows in advance what those costs are. Normally it's invoiced to the club, and then whether the club pass that on to the player or not is a matter for them. But every CB is able to charge their own costs depending on what their own costs are for running their disciplinary process within the CB.
Thank you, Becky. I'm conscious we have got some more questions here. Unfortunately we've hit the hour. So what we'll do is we'll circulate an FAQ with the questions on it. I think we've got to a lot of them, but we'll send it round. We'll also send these slides round with links in them and a few other things. And in terms of, I'm going to probably pronounce your name really badly here, De Broy. If I've pronounced that semi-correctly, I'm happy to drop you an email direct and pick up with you on a few points around the hearing process and answer any questions if you've still got any afterwards. But overall, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. As I say, it was an introduction tonight, and we're happy to take questions. And sorry, we'll circulate this document, but just thank you for attending, and I'll hand back to Alex. If you want to put any last minute questions in the FAQs, please put them in, and we'll make sure we answer those as well. Otherwise, we'll let everyone drop off. But thanks for attending.
Thanks very much. That finishes the webinar there. I'll say, like David says, if you've got any final questions, please put them into the Q&A and we will take them away afterwards. This has been recorded and obviously will be sent out and will be available sort of from tomorrow on the RFU Club Support YouTube channel. So have a look for it there, but we will send it out also. Have a nice evening, everyone. Thanks for joining.